Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Today's program is AI and Reasonable Care, Meeting Importer and Broker Obligations with Confidence. My name is Miles Getlin. I'm a partner with the law firm Cassidy Levy Kent, based in our Washington, D.C. office. For those who are not familiar with Cassidy Levy Kent or CLK, we're a boutique international trade law firm. We focus on full range of international trade issues and matters, trade remedies, import and export compliance and enforcement, trade and tariff policy. And in addition to our Washington, D.C. office, where we have nearly 50 trade lawyers and non-lawyer professionals, we have offices in Ottawa, Canada, and Brussels, Belgium. As sponsor and speaker for our discussion today, I'd like to thank AAEI and all of you for joining us today. A couple housekeeping items before we start our program. A few quick reminders. We encourage you to submit questions using the Q&A feature, which should be at the bottom of your screen. It is bottom of my screen. And we'll address as many as we can at the end of our discussion. The session is being recorded, and a link will be shared with registrants in a day or two. So now let me introduce our two esteemed speakers today. We are very fortunate to have Sue Ross and Philip Poland joining us. First, Sue Ross, who is well known to many of you and an AEI board member. Sue chairs the regulatory practice and cybersecurity and privacy practice at the law firm Mitchell, Silverberg and Nutt, where she advises domestic and foreign companies in all aspects of import and export compliance before CBP and other federal regulatory agencies. Sue is also one of the foremost professionals in the area of cybersecurity, and in recent years has been dealing with issues related to artificial intelligence and its impact on legal and regulatory compliance. So obviously, Sue's experience is valuable for our program today. And we are also joined by AAI board member Philip Poland. Philip has over 2 decades of experience in international trade law and business law. He's currently senior corporate counsel for regulatory compliance at Illuminate USA LLC. Illuminate is a solar panel manufacturer based in Ohio. Philip heads the trade compliance organization at Illuminate, and he also oversees corporate and regulatory compliance with a broad scope of government agencies. Previously, Philip served as counsel at DHL for about 15 years. Thank you both for joining us today, Philip and Sue. And if you'd like to learn more about our speakers, you can do so. Please click on the resources tab at the bottom of your screen. So with that, let's dive into this timely program. Let's level set everyone, given the name of the program and the focus of the program, which is AI and Reasonable Care, Meeting Importer and Broker Obligations with Confidence. Let's get a sense of what that means. What does reasonable care involve? What are brokers obligated to do? And Philip, as you are with an importer and you are focused on import compliance, maybe get us started talking about what reasonable care involves.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, sorry. So I don't know how many of you saw Gil Armstrong had written an article for AEI that was published just a week or so ago. It was actually really good. That gave a good summary overall of reasonable care. And of course, it's really based in informed compliance, right? And the obligation of the importer under CBP regulations and through executive order to have informed compliance. And so the importer has to exercise reasonable care because it's providing information to the broker that they're filing, and they can be liable for that information. And so this is where a lot of this comes in, because as more and more people are getting AI generated data that they're giving to the broker, that broker then relies on it. You then can be held liable for the false information. And of course, the most recent article, if you guys did not see it, published by AEI this week, was the one on False Claims Act and how Customs is starting to go after importers on False Claims Act. It was a very good article published on AEI's LinkedIn page if you guys haven't seen it. And so that really becomes kind of the core basis, separate from like a broker, which under 111, which are turn over to sue for.
Thanks, Phil. So let me start with sort of picking up where you left off from the importer side. The language in the law is pretty general, and that's true for both the obligation on the importer and the responsible supervision obligation on the broker. I go back far enough that I remember when this all came into the law in 94 or 93, late 93.
93. Yeah, 93 with
the
the
other
executive
half
order.
of the NAFTA bill.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall, and Philip, you probably do too, John Durant standing up, and I don't know how many trade association meetings saying bananas from Iceland is not an exercise in reasonable care. Miles, you may remember John saying that as well. And what has finally come out is that Customs has said it interprets the law to mean the importer is obligated to get the classification value and any other specifics correct at time of entry. Hence the opportunity to file reconciliation entries if there's an error as a way of flagging for Customs up front that there's going to be a change. The challenge is we only have a handful of court cases that have really basically said, both for the broker and for the importer, not vetting the information in some manner, and it's a higher level of vetting for an importer, or at least a different level of vetting for an importer than it is for a broker. If Customs tells you to do X and you don't do X, that's not reasonable care. You can disagree with Customs about something, but you have to follow their direction. And if you don't, you will get yourself in trouble. And what we're seeing now is oftentimes 28s are issued. If there's no response, there's immediately a 29, and then there's a letter of investigation, or at least notifying of an investigation. So we are in an environment where enforcement is the key. And Customs, at least through the Department of Justice, has said we are having trouble convincing juries or judges, as the case may be, about the difference between gross negligence and negligence. And so since it's taking a while for Congress to act on the proposals to update the customs laws, that's why you're now seeing the use of the False Claims Act, which is what we lawyers would call strict liability, meaning you goofed. We don't care what the level of mistake is. It's wrong, and now we're going to decide what we're going to do to you. So it's using one more tool in the toolbox, as somebody who used to be at Customs is so fond of saying.
It's good to get your insight on this, given that Philip, you mentioned informed compliance, and you want to go to Customs and understand what your obligations are through, and Customs issues those informed compliance publications, and they're often so helpful. But in this key area of reasonable care, Customs came out with that ICP years ago, and just a list of questions which are informative, but it's certainly leaves a lot to be interpreted. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we go on with this discussion.
If I could just add, Miles, I mean, we do have a couple of court cases where the courts has basically said accepting the information without doing due diligence is not reasonable care.
Correct.
So
and I was going to
we know, but how much you have to do, we don't know.
Exactly. And I was going to say, for me, I look at it, thankfully, from an AI perspective, this is kind of new, but there are, and I realize not everybody's here a lawyer, but from a lawyer's perspective, there are like 4 or 5 very solid cases on this. And it's interesting, as attorneys, we have to go through ethics every year, and every year they raise this, at least the last couple of years. And yet this year, another high profile case with the MyPillow guy, Mike Lindell, right? 2 of his attorneys turned around and used AI, didn't check it, and were fined by the court $3,000 each. And so we, obviously we don't have Customs cases there, but when you look at those, like, the courts are saying, look, you can't just get the data, you got to verify it. And so again, I know that's dealing with lawyers and with citing and their briefs, but in my mind, it sets like kind of where the courts would probably go if something went right, where they're back to that of you can't just blanketly take the data.
Well, and the flip side to it is, and you know this as an importer, and we've talked about this in the past, Phil, most significant sized importers require the law firms that they hire to disclose whether or not they're using AI and how they're using it. And certainly when you forget the lawyer angle of it and you look just at companies of varying sizes, they're all using AI for certain things already. So there's a real push to think about how do we make it work in the trade arena.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yep. that might be a great segue to sort of getting into the technology side of things, because lawyers, law firms, brokers, importers, we've all used technology. We use technology every day to for productivity, for substance. AI, this seems new, but is it, how new is it? Is it really just an evolution of decades of technology, or is this a whole new paradigm? And so maybe Sue, you can speak a little bit about how technology has been leveraged in the past to advance trade compliance, to advance an importer's exercise of reasonable care, and then how is AI different, or how is that just is this just the latest development? Is there anything really new here, or what are the maybe some of the factors that about AI or aspects of AI that cause us to think of this really more as a paradigm shift?
Well, I think we have to start with the idea that AI is like any other technology. You got to make sure it's accurate. And we'll talk, I think, a little bit later about areas in which it's prone to be more accurate than or more usable than others. But I think I would start by saying figure out what you want the AI to do, and then make sure that it produces at the level that you need. Because if we learn nothing else about the definitions of responsible supervision and reasonable care, it's don't just take the output and submit it. I think in a lot of ways, this is just a natural progression of the use of technology. I mean, we all use phones all the time. We use computers all the time. We text, we send emails. So this is all obviously forms of technology. I'm old enough to remember a certain commissioner who was notoriously known for saying automate or perish. And that led to a lot of the systems that are in place at the brokers now and self-filers. And so I think this is just a progression of things. But again, I do think that companies have to be careful how they're using AI and what they're using it for, and whether it's reliable enough to get the result you need. And the old expression of GIGO or GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't give it enough information, you're automatically going to get the wrong answer. I think AI is sort of the flavor of the month in a sense. I mean, I did say earlier that lots of companies are using AI for lots of, for example, financial reporting, where you're talking about, adding, subtracting, multiplying, using formulas and so on. But I think, Phil, you've been through this in a number of companies, so I'm going to defer to you for the rest of the answer.
Yeah, I was going to say, in my mind, this is just a expansion of machine learning. So in a prior life, I was at a company that was using machine learning to create predictive analytics, right? So you look at, okay, this information was presented to the employee, they classified it this way. Okay, they've done that 5 times. Therefore, the computer can predict that when the 6th time comes in, it's the same as the prior 5, right? And the systems would go through and you would get like prediction scores. Okay, do I have 80% confidence, 90% confidence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so the idea was you look at behavior that's being done by a human being, and then the computer decides to pick and says, yeah, this is probably the classification, right, based off of prior human behavior, with a set level of confidence. And so in my mind, the AI is really just the next level. to where it's kind of going in. And one of the huge benefits with the AI, depending on, and we've done 2 seminars now with the different AI software. We're going to do a third one because there's some of the companies that we've yet to show. So I'd like to really moderate a third one of those sessions where we look at like Gaia Dynamic, KYG, Thomson Reuters, because those 3 we haven't talked with yet. But depending on which one, and if you guys have participated in the other 2 sessions, that like they use different methodologies, but what's great is it pulls in a lot of information. And so what I'm noticing with AI is that AI models off of what the human being process would be, and then it documents it. And so, back to Gil Armstrong's document that he wrote for AEI a couple of weeks ago, where he talked about reasonable care. One of the things that in that article was it talked about documentation. One of the great things about the AI system softwares is the documentation. So if you don't mind, Miles, or jump straight to classification, if that's okay with you. Yeah.
We're at the conceptual. Let's dive into some of the concrete in terms of, what importers are doing, what they're required to report, the information they're required to declare, and how AI advances that. So sure, you mentioned classification. Why don't you dive into that?
So one of the things that we did when we were looking at different tools, and there's different tools today than what, when we first started looking at this over a year ago now, about 18 months ago.
Bill, sorry. Clarify when you say we, are you talking about
AEI? Yes, Illuminate, sorry. Is we actually took known classifications on items. And so all these companies would give you demos. And what we would do is we would throw things in there because they're going to give you a demo and they're going to show you how it works well because they've already preloaded it. So what we did is we were like, okay, well, we're going to give you items to classify and let's see if the system can fail or work. And we purposely gave it tricky ones. And so one of the things that I noticed was that none of the systems were super, super efficient, like from the very beginning. But if you think about it again, if I go back to that machine learning, okay, I saw an employee do something 5 times. Now when it comes in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it should be the same. AI is really the same way. You have to teach it. So one of the things that I know when we were first looking at it, and then we first purchased our AI classification software at Illuminate a while ago, well over a year ago. I kept telling my employees because they were getting frustrated. I was like, is it at least 80% there? Is it at least 90% there? Like, let's work on it. Because you have to teach the software. And so there were areas where there would be gaps, but if you look at it today, it's very different, right? So if you look at it over the year, it's learned. And so one of the things you have to start really looking at is what that meant, though, is you had to look at it. You couldn't just like trust and rely on it. Now, I'm going to say part of this with reasonable care also deals with your risk profile, right? So if you are at maybe a consumer, because some of these softwares, one of the big things that they brag about is they kick out the classification really quickly. And if I'm in a consumer goods area and maybe I don't have like a lot of high risk area items, maybe you have less risk, but we're in kind of a high profile industry where customs is all over us, right? I came out of the aerospace industry. Originally, I worked at 2 of the large, massive blue chip aerospace companies. So if I'm thinking about it from the export side, we were very high risk. You would never do anything unless you like double, triple, quadruple checked your ECCNs and your USML categories, right? Because of the high risk of the goods. And so, and I have 2 licensed customs brokers that work for me with 20 years of experience. And so we've had these discussions internally where they're like, look, we are licensed. And so when we give this to the broker, like we know we're at a company, we're in an importer, but we feel like our license is like, there's a perception that they have a greater obligation placed on them because they are licensed. Does that make sense? And so because of that, they are more concerned than maybe like Joe Blow in logistics, who's just loading the stuff up and saying, hey, can I get a classification in 1 minute? And they're more likely, and we had a lot of discussions early on where they were like, I can get a classification quick, but I'd rather make it more accurate. So we actually kind of, quite frankly, broke our system, if that makes sense. We went to the company and said, look, we're seeing all this stuff. This is really fabulous. How is it getting there? And they're like, oh, well, the system's making this assumption, this assumption, this assumption. And we said, we don't want the system to make any assumptions. And they're like, well, that makes no sense because you're not going to get your classification really quickly. And we said, yeah, we'd rather kind of like, or if it's going to make an assumption, we want to see every assumption so that we can walk through it. So what it's done is it's not as effective from a time perspective, if that makes sense. Like, because it's interesting, actually, like we were working on a classification as a group this week or end of last week. And like 3 of us were all looking at it together and sitting in the software. And the one girl's like, all this is really doing is walking us through the tariff. And I'm like, yeah, but it's asking us questions and it's prompting us with questions. And we may not have thought about those questions had we not been in the software. And the software is pulling rulings, and the software is pulling explanatory notes, and the software is pulling all the chapter notes. I don't have to go flip. It's putting it all there, and it's giving me an organized question flow. And so even if it saves us like a fraction of the time, it's okay because it's documenting every decision that we make. And every time we click yes or no, or we add in additional information, all of that is recorded. And my perspective on it as like an attorney for the company is I'm looking at it saying, look, if it takes you 20 minutes to classify an item, just hypothetically, I'm throwing numbers out there, and you do that in the book by paper, now go down and document every single thing you looked at. The documentation process is probably 2 to 3 times the amount of time that it took you to physically classify it.
Let me ask you this, Philip, because you mentioned you have taken a look at various solutions, technology solutions, AI tools. Have you found that they all are capable of basically taking on the information that you would expect the 3 of us to utilize in classifying a product? So on the product side, all of the relevant information, specifications of the product, does it matter how complex the product is? And then on the sort of the legal side, you mentioned the explanatory notes, the HTS section, chapter notes, customs rulings. Have you found that all of these AI tools will leverage all of that information the same way, but they may, it sounds like there may be a difference in, how they're interpreting or assumptions that are being made. I'm just wondering how different because there's lots of different solutions out there, and maybe the audience would benefit from hearing, how different are these?
Well, that's why we did the 2 sessions and why I want to do a third one. So the 2 sessions we did is Amy Morgan did the first one. I did the second one where we got companies on there and we asked them to explain exactly how the software's worked. And then, like I said, I really want to do a third one where we pick up, there's at least 3 companies I'm aware of that we've not interviewed in those other 2 sessions. And if you go back and you watch those webinars, you'll notice they do things differently. So I don't want to name company names, and I don't want to go through that, right? And I don't want to show preference in any way, shape, or form. So I'm trying to be very careful in my response. But they approach things differently, and that's why we did those webinars so people could see how they approach. And one of the things that my staff and I were looking at was we love, and I hate to throw a name out there, but customs info, right? And so we were like, okay, if I have customs info, this is the process I'm going to follow. Can I find a software that's going to imitate the process I would follow in customs info? Does that make sense? And
yeah. And you've been speaking about classification, where I think earlier you mentioned, companies were leveraging technology for purposes of classifying merchandise, well before the last couple of years. So maybe you can speak to another area of compliance, maybe valuation or country of origin, just in terms of how you think AI could be leveraged to support an importer's, declaration of that kind of information, and, what the pitfalls might be.
Well, let me kind of close the loop first, if you don't mind, on what Phil talked, which is, look, if you have a product where the only difference between the versions of the product is the color of the paint, and one's red, one's blue, one's purple, whatever. Classification is an area where the systems are pretty good. That's kind of where everybody's focused, and understandably so. Certainly getting the documentation, being able to back up what you've decided and so on. are keys to being successful. And therefore, having gotten the system to classify something the first time, it makes sense that if the only difference is color, unless color makes a difference, and I can't think of any classifications right now where it does, then you would rely on the results that you got the first time to classify the red, the blue, and the green versions. But when you get to things like value and origin, I'm not aware of any of the systems being really good at that. They certainly will pull in from an invoice that you give it that's been OCR'd. If you do that, it'll pull in what the value states. But I'm not aware that they're necessarily any good at pulling in the difference between its FOB and CIF, which is, of course, critical. I'm not aware that they're good at pulling in the comment on the bill of lading of whether the freight is prepaid or collect, which could or could not be an anomaly depending on what you said the term of sale was. So I think we're a ways away from there. I think maybe there's a system out there, I'm not aware of it, where they're pulling in all of the value additions, packing, commissions, and so on, that they're able to make the kinds of determinations where you decide something needs to be either added or subtracted from the value. I think it's going to happen eventually, but it's going to be a while before that can get done. And similarly, I don't know that the AI right now, at least, is really good with concepts like essential character or substantial transformation. Is it possible they could be down the road? Yeah, but that's going to take a fair amount of work.
Yeah, so Sue, there's companies that are claiming they can do it. I've not played with it, but effectively what they do is you feed the data in, and then they have prompts written that ask the questions that we would ask. And then it goes and it analyzes the data. I've not played with it myself personally, so I don't want to give any answer on the quality of it. But in theory,
being made, but until we actually get our hands on it, get to play with it.
Right. But in theory, if you think about it, you take the questions you would ask and you write that as an AI prompt, and then you throw that against the data. And then as long as you feed it the data, but again, it's going to only be able to analyze the data that you feed to it.
Right. Look, GEICO is not going to change. If you don't give it the right information, you're not going to get the right results. I'm sorry, that's just the way things work. It's like adding up 2 and 2 and getting 5.
Yeah.
And that's got to be a particular challenge in the valuation area where things like royalties or assists.
Yeah.
This is information that are coming from systems that are not always sort of integrated with the trade compliance function. You've got to be, grilling people in various countries to understand if, not even if they're royalties, but what they relate to, looking at the agreements to see if they're dutiable. It seems like, of course, it can get there, but from what I've heard, and I think your comments confirm this, that we're not quite there yet in that space.
Yeah, and what it's really good at doing is scraping data from documents. Right. So a great example is we use it where we can feed all of our import documents and to the system, and it scrapes it and it analyzes it, and it's able to completely pre-populate ISFs, your 3461, et cetera. Right. And so it's able to go through and analyze that, grab that. But again, like you said, Sue, it's grabbing the value that's on the invoice documents. It's not like going then and analyzing it to say, I wonder if you actually gave me the correct data, yes or no. So the human being has to go in and do that next level of review.
Yeah. We actually have some, I don't know if you've seen them, Miles, but we have some interesting questions in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Sorry, I haven't been looking at it.
No,
sorry.
It's all good. I think that's what the moderator is supposed to be doing. So I appreciate Sue calling those out. Let's see. We have a question here. In your opinion, is using AI for converting information from documents to ABI for writing customs entries exercising reasonable care?
So I think
if you're a self-filer, it could be, but for the most part, if you're talking about writing customs entries, that's the broker responsibility for most companies. So it technically would be, responsible supervision. But I think all of these questions are going to come down to how are you doing it and do you get the right answer?
So in my mind, I view it really is, because as long as a human being looks at it. So are just like, so Cindy asked two questions. So since you did the one with converting data, I'll go ahead and start with that one. So if you look at the way our system works, right? So we feed all the documents in, it scrapes all the data, it pre-populates everything. A human being still has to theoretically look at it and hit send, right? A computer cannot hit send, or you shouldn't have a computer hit send. So there's still your responsible supervision, right? Your reasonable care, because you're still going to go in and look at it quickly to make sure that it's correct. I actually, in my mind, so going to Cindy's first question about the tariff classification, this is why we changed the system. So the systems that are out there are designed where you feed data in and it gives you a classification fairly quickly. And we sat back and said, okay, is speed better than quality? And again, if I'm a large consumer goods person where I'm putting out thousands a day, maybe that's a different story. But for us, we're doing, maybe 20 a month or something like that, new products that are like new spare parts and new items coming in. We said, no, it's worth it to do the review. And I have full confidence that we're still exercising reasonable care because we're looking at all the assumptions that the software makes. And again, that's because we went back to the provider and said, we know you can do this quick. I don't want it quick. What I want is show me every decision the software makes. I want to see every assumption the AI makes. I want to see every basis the AI is using so that we can go down and review it. And if we disagree with it, we can change something. I would rather have the AI prompt me with a question than the AI make an assumption. So that, but again, I have licensed customs brokers that work for me who know how to do it in the book.
Yeah, but you've raised 2 points which are really critical. The first one is, and you've spoken about this publicly, so I'm not telling any stories out of school. The first one is that you're turning all of the documents into digital form.
Yes.
And that is critical because not everybody's doing that. The other thing you've talked about and mentioned several times today is that you have gotten the provider to give you in some documented form the questions, the assumptions, whatever it is that the software is doing to get to the end. Mm-hmm. It is not necessarily true that everybody using AI goes to that extent. I think they should.
Right.
But at the very least, I think, yeah, I mean, it's not the output. If it's just an HTS US subheading, remember, what is reasonable care? It's in the eyes of CBP what reasonable care is. If you are asked by customs, how did you get this classification? If you just have a subheading on a piece of paper, this was the output of our solution, of course, that's not going to be adequate. So I would say beyond preference and in response to Cindy's question, is it reasonable care to use AI to classify? Well, as the importer, you better know how you got to that classification. You're going to be expected to understand that.
It's not so much you need to know, you need to document.
So, and this is where I was going earlier, right? So with my SAP early on, I said, look, is the software at least 80% there? Is it 90% there? Right? I said, the key is, the benefit is the documentation because it creates an auditable record. So I go back and think about when we did it in the book, or if you've got like customs info and you're looking at it, or you use a book, or you look online, however you did it, right? Like before we got it, right? You get the documents, you look at it, we're manually classifying it. We had a parts database and an Excel spreadsheet. And then I would put notes beside it. Like I had a comment section in the parts database, and I would write notes of, well, here's kind of what I looked at, or here's what I was looking at, or whatever. Honestly, if I was audited, I'm not sure customs would say, hey, that's a pretty good thing. The positive with the AI software is we now have like a really solid auditable record, right? So even if it took 20 minutes to classify today, or, with the software, and it took 20 minutes in the book, it's worth it because it's documented, and you can look in there and you can see, here's every assumption, here's everything it looked at it, here's how it applied chapter notes, here's rulings it relied on, all of that data, so that I have an actual auditable record to custom. So I actually think it like really improves the reasonable care, and I really believe the AI like makes us a more responsible importer, if that makes sense.
Oh.
And maybe other people were different. I can just tell you, like, early on when we would get a ton of these and they would hit and I was trying to work really quickly, like I didn't do a super thorough job documenting every single decision I made. Right. And I don't know how many people do. I mean, maybe other importers are much better than I was. But, it's not like you're writing a 5-page treatise on every single item. If you've got 65,000 items in your parts database, are you really writing a treatise on every single one of them?
Well, and that's a great point because and that goes to sort of cost benefit analysis and risk assessment, right? Do you want to save all that time? Well, saving time is a tremendous benefit when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of items. But an importer certainly should know, which products account for, most of their value. Maybe there are, a few models that are most important or are the most complex products. You're going to want to, just like now or pre-AI, you're going to want to spend most of your time on the really tricky parts and let technology do its job to help save time on the routine, right? The repetitive.
Correct. Exactly. Because there's still going to be items, right? And that you're going to go to outside counsel and say, please help us with this, or please classify this, or please look at this, or we have questions, right? Or
Of all the outside counsel out there, we appreciate that.
no problem. So, and to go to Kathy Neal's question, is it improving? Yes. And so you have to teach the AI, right? And so what we've noticed now with using it for over a year, well over a year, is that it's getting better and better and better and better and better, right? Like it's fast, like it's learning quickly, and but again, we go back and we check, right? So it's like that trust but verify, if that makes sense. Like I think that's like the big mantra that we always have as a team is trust but verify. So
Well, Stacy sort of asked the logical follow-up, which is how much knowledge and effort to gain knowledge is really being shown by all of these providers. And that's frankly one of the questions you need to ask when you go and evaluate a provider. How are they evaluating their programming? What are they referring to? Are they giving you that information and so on? Because if it's, free and it seems to be too good to be true, it probably is. So
yeah,
there's the
it's
due
where they're
diligence,
yeah,
and then there's the due diligence.
correct. And these companies all should have compliance departments. They should have brokers inside of them. And where are they grabbing the data? What are they using as the basis for the data and things like that, right? So
Well, I think that, I mean, Sue, you use the term garbage in, garbage out, and obviously the risk of not of the AI tool not having access or utilizing, leveraging all of the necessary or relevant information, the output is not going to be sound. Are there other risks that either of you see just in terms of utilizing AI in this, in the import compliance realm or trade compliance for that matter?
I think I'm sorry, I was going to say, in my mind, it is a tool to help you. You still have to know what you're doing. So a great example is we have fed during demos, we have fed the same data to multiple providers, right? And what was interesting is they pulled different rulings. Well, okay, how did they get the different rulings and which rulings did they use and how does that work and things like that? And do I want to blindly rely on a ruling, or is it going to give me a ruling and I can click in that link and I want to go in and look at it? My concern is that, and this is why I purposely hired a licensed broker to work for me. And I realized not all companies can do that. And I realized not all companies have that. I was like, I want someone knowledgeable looking at this, because the problem is if you don't know what you're looking at, you're not going to be able to identify when the AI hallucinates, right? Which is when the AI makes up information, right? You're not going to be able to know like where the mistakes are. So in my mind, it's like expediting and making things faster and easier, but you still have to know what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, look, cost is obviously a factor. And that's one of the risks. You find something that you can afford, but if it doesn't do what you need it to do, or it won't integrate with the current software that you've got, it's not the right solution. And buying it just for the sake of buying it because you can afford it is a bad decision. Now, some people are forced into that. I recognize that just because of the way management is. But ideally, what you want to be able to do is evaluate the providers, both from the perspective of what do the programs do and their knowledge level. Now, I agree with Phil that in many cases that we know of, we're dealing with people that either are licensed brokers or have worked for the Big Four, which used to be the Big Six, or otherwise have reason to know what they're doing. But you still run into, okay, so at 5 o'clock on Friday, the president announces a 232 tariff that starts on Monday. How quickly is the AI going to be able to pick that up?
Mm-hmm.
And those are the kind of questions that need to be asked of the service providers when they're doing the demo. You've got 232, you've got 301, you've got IEEPA. At least with 232 and 301, there probably was some programming done, because those are not new provisions in terms of a source of revenue for the government.
Yeah. And if you talk denied party, yeah, Cisco's like denied party screening is the same way, right? Like, does your service provider update within 24 hours? And so there are cases where, and I haven't seen one recently, but I know of a case at least 15, 18 years ago where several companies were hit because like it got published on a Friday and the service provider didn't update until like Monday or Tuesday, and they did a transaction on Friday or over the weekend. And so like they hit that gap. And so, yeah, that's definitely a question you want to look at. And to that point, Sue, I mean, one of the ways that we use our AI is to analyze tariff analysis, right? So we can go in and we can say, I have this item, and if I buy it from, Taiwan, what are all the tariffs, right? If I buy it from Germany, what are all the tariffs, whatever, for that exact same HTS code, right? And the systems are able to go through and look at it. And they're able to give me a pretty good layout of here's the duties, here's the tariffs, and all of them, right? Like the IEEPA, the 232, right? Like the software does a really good job. It saves a ton of time. And so that's like a great area. And so, and you're relying on, or you're hoping that the service provider is keeping that up to date. Now we keep a separate from our parts database for our most critical items, our bill of material items that we actually are using for manufacturing. We manually go in and check all that, right? And we manually enter it into a spreadsheet actually for our procurement organization. But if you think about it, like that's like a great area for AI, because AI, if the software is there, like, and it's updated, it can quickly go through and do all those analysis for you very quickly. You can come up with that like, and pretty fast, right? To kind of analyze that.
So long as Sue, you mentioned it is taking into account on a very regular basis updates, especially in this world that we're in. Sue,
so isn't one of the questions that you need to ask not only how quickly are they updating, but what sources are they using to update from?
Yes.
And Sue, I'm not sure everyone caught the detailed intros of your impressive background. They know, Sue, that you are a trade guru, but in addition, you're chair of your firm's cybersecurity and privacy practice. And I wonder if you could comment for a moment or two on, we talk about risks of using AI, privacy concerns, confidentiality concerns, the notion of closed systems and open systems. I think maybe the audience would or participants would benefit from your insight there.
Thanks, Miles. I appreciate that. So one of the key questions to every one of these software providers is, are you giving them the data, or are they giving you the software on your system and you're using it to analyze the data? This is the confidentiality question that you just raised, and it's important to importers for trade secrets purposes, business proprietary information, and so on. It's important to brokers because of their obligation of confidentiality. I think it's 111.24, 111.28, somewhere in there. So this is a key part of understanding who's got the data. It's not uncommon for the service providers to get from you data that has been anonymized, is the term of art, where it can't be tracked to a different product, a specific product or a specific vendor or a specific importer. That does raise some questions, as you said, Phil, about certain things that you're manufacturing and that are more sophisticated and might be unique to your company versus some other solar provider. So there's a certain amount of balancing that goes on. Things like the name of your supplier, which is going to be on an invoice, which is going to be digitized. How much of that are you willing to share? Keeping in mind, it's going into the service provider's database. I think one of the other points I would want to make, so that we don't spend a lot of time on this topic, because I could go on for a couple of hours on some of this stuff, but do not use ChatGPT. Now, I'm going to tell you this not because it's not a good thing to use, but because everything that you input into it goes into its machine learning. It goes into its own database. So if you give it names and dates and values or prices or whatever, that's the confidentiality of that is gone.
Yep.
Well, you're getting major applause on that comment.
I saw that. Yes, thank you to everybody that noticed. Look, it's a common sense issue.
Yeah.
And if you can get the time to use your common sense, that's really where you want to be on all of this. But it's all part of how the company protects its, it's like the Coke formula. How do you protect it?
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing too, and we had a very visible evidence of this, which I would imagine most people on the phone are aware of, which was AWS going down. Especially if you have teenagers with TikTok and everything. There was they're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? All these systems are down. My son's like, what happened to my video games? Anyhow, a lot of these providers use AWS, and as we just saw last weekend, AWS crashed, right? So a lot of things all of a sudden didn't work. So just think about that as well, right? And make sure that your companies have some kind of a backup or other ways, and they have good agreements with AWS, and what happens when AWS all of a sudden goes down.
Those agreements all basically say the same thing, which is they're not responsible.
Good point.
But your point about backup is really valuable.
Yeah.
Because you do not want the only source of the information to be wherever your servers are. Right. Even if you're using AWS or some other cloud provider, how do you back your system up? I know that we had a situation with a client where somebody got, and this is quite a while ago, somebody got a notice that said that their system had been hacked, that they had X a period of time to pay whatever the ransomware was. Sorry, the ransom. And somebody just sort of, the recipient just sort of ignored that. And so the whole system got shut down. There were terabytes of information. Fortunately, they had a clean version, but it still took a week and a half to restore everything.
Yep. Miles, if you don't mind, Karen Liddell asked a question, and then Cindy. So for Cindy's last question about the improvements, we did nothing. The software does it on its own. AI learns, just like a human being learns. So the more you feed it, the more you do stuff. So if I'm importing similar parts and I feed it into the system 5 times, it gets smarter and smarter and smarter as it goes. So you don't have to do anything to necessarily, the way you teach it, the way you make it and improve it is by cramming a lot more data into it, to be honest. The more you put in, the smarter and the better it gets, and the more effective it becomes. One other area, and this gets into Karen's area, and this is a big area, and kind of the last area, if you don't mind. one big area that we are using AI that's been pretty impressive is not just scraping data out of documents, but actually analyzing documents. So right now, um, there are AI tools out there, and there's several companies. So I don't want to like name names or give preference to any of them. But one of the impressive areas that we're doing it is I can literally drop, say, 1,000 documents into the AI. The AI can go in there and analyze what's a commercial invoice, what's a packing list, what's the airway bill, analyze all the different documents, all the different transportation documents. It can segregate all of them, and then it can do analysis on those documents. So it can say, okay, do the values flow? Do the weights flow? Can I find like a consistent purchase order all the way through? Can I do it? And then what happens is you have the data there. And if you know how to write AI prompts, which is super impressive with some of the companies, with some of the new systems that are out there now, is there's some companies now where I can load all the data and it's just my data. And if you know how to write AI prompts, you can sit there and write AI prompts and prompt into your own data and start asking it questions. And so if you start looking at things like supply chain traceability, UFLPA, a lot of stuff, something that would have taken like human beings an extremely long time to do, the AI can do, and I say fairly quickly. If I'm going to have it analyze 1,000 documents, I'm probably sitting there for a half hour, an hour while it's plugging and shoving. But if you think about it from a human being perspective, how many days would it have taken me to go through and do all of that versus like loading a bunch of AI prompts and then waiting an hour and getting an output? And we're getting some impressive outputs. It's taken a lot of learning. It's taken a lot of work. It's taken some training of the AI, but it's getting more and more impressive at the ability of the AI to not just like scrape data and drop it into 3461, but to truly organize all of the documents. And then to be able to say, yes, this purchase order goes from here to here to here. Okay, yep, this is the bill of lading here. I can see it here. Or here is the shipper, here's the consignee. Now I can follow it back through the supply chain and I can start to trace it. That to me is one of the most impressive new areas where we're starting to look at it. The next area I really am going to start playing with is, let's say I've got multiple suppliers, like 12 suppliers, and one of them is like maybe questionable. Can I load, say, like 1 million lines of data into it and then say, go find every single product that was ever made using that item, right? Or that company, right?
Yeah.
Or let's say it's not questionable, but the new FIAC rules under Department of Energy where you've got ownership and it's like, hey, do I have a company that's 50% Chinese owned? Go find every single one, right? Like that to me is what's impressive with current AI is its ability to analyze huge volumes of documents.
Well, I think, and I think we're right towards the end of our program here. I think what your comments just now, and really Sue, your comments, and Phil, your comments throughout, confirmed that what we said at the outset, human beings are still necessary to exercise reasonable care, for a broker to have responsible supervision of the customs transactions, to avoid any unlicensed customs business. And so with that, really appreciate both of you, Sue and Philip, for your participation. Before we close, please note that this webinar has been approved for credit. The verification code for obtaining credit for participating in this event will be shared via email shortly. If you'd like to learn more about upcoming AAI programs and events, please visit our website or the resources tab. We hope you will join us at future webinars and plan to attend AAI's 105th annual conference and trade day next June. Thank you again, Sue and Philip, for sharing your expertise today. I think it was really, it was enjoyable for me to listen to you and to join you. We appreciate the opportunity here at CLK to have been able to sponsor this event. And thank you all for joining us and for your patience as we try to get through the technology issues, ironically, at the beginning of the program. We'd appreciate you taking a moment to fill out a brief survey when the program ends, and hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day. Thank you all.